A reading from the book of Job. There once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your power, only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. These familiar words from traditional wedding vows will surely conjure images of a bride and groom standing at the altar, flanked by family and friends with giddy anticipation. But several moments before these words are spoken, a rather different question is posed that tends to make the room a bit nervous. If any of you know cause or just impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. Now, as my mama likes to say, that's the kind of question that'll make your booty grab onto the seat cushion. I mean, seriously, right? Perhaps someone out there intends to sabotage the whole thing. Maybe ex-boyfriend Greg is still in love with the bride. Or maybe Frida from college has it out for the groom. Greg and Frida were not invited to the wedding, of course, but that doesn't make you any less paranoid now, does it? Now, what's even scarier is the possibility that someone out there might actually claim to have a legitimate reason for calling this sacred union into question. Perhaps this person has reason to believe that one or both partners will not hold up their end of the bargain, that they'll commit for better, but not for worse, for richer, but not for poorer, in health, but not in sickness. In the first two chapters of the book of Job, something like this actually happens. You see, God is bragging about a blameless Gentile from the land of Uz, heaping more praise on this man than just about any other character in the Bible. Right there in the company of his heavenly court, which we might imagine being a congregation gathered for a wedding. If we continue using our imaginations, we might hear the archangel Michael ask the question, "If any of you know cause or just impediment, why the God of Israel and his servant Job should not be joined in covenant, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Suddenly, a voice is heard from the back row, "I object to this covenant." And with a collective gasp, all members of the heavenly court turn around. Don't worry, it's not you. It's not you back there. They turn around and they see one of their fellow angels standing on a chair with his arms crossed defiantly. It's the one they call the Satan, the adversary. Now, in the original language, the definite article "the" is attached to the word Satan, which is lowercased. And since personal names never include the definite article, we know that this figure here is not Satan with a capital S, also known as the devil. He's more like a chief prosecutor who brings litigation to God's court. And this angel is shady. You see, Job is a wealthy man who owns thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, donkeys, and servants. If he were alive today, he might live in a mansion in Beverly Hills with a yacht and a private plane. And what the lectionary doesn't include from chapter 1 is Satan's assertion that Job only fears God because of the wealth he accrues from doing so. He basically calls Job a gold digger. He's only in it for the money, he says. And the accuser doesn't think Job would remain faithful if he lost all of these material possessions. To have and to hold for richer or poorer? Probably not, says the accuser. But after everything is taken away, including his family and livestock, and Job persists in faithfulness, the shady lawyer moves the goalpost. Whereas he'd originally suggested that Job was motivated by his possessions, now he claims that Job threw his family and livestock under the bus. Far from being motivated by his possessions, he's only motivated by self-preservation. This self-seeking lowlife doesn't care what happens to anybody or anything as long as he gets out of it unscathed. Skin for skin, the accuser cries. In other words, this ruthless man is willing to offer the skin of his family and his animals to save his own hide. And if he's only motivated by self-preservation and self-wellness, he will not persist in faithfulness if he's tormented within an inch of his life. To have and to hold in sickness and in health? The accuser thinks not. Now, what are we to make of this angel's shiftiness and his morally ambiguous status as an agent of God's divine counsel on the one hand, and an agent of deception on the other? Something seems to be changing about this angel. He's not Satan with a capital S, at least not yet. But we're witnessing his transformation. And as much as this book is about what happens to Job, it's also about what happens to this angelic litigator. Because what happens to both of them has everything to do with the holy, beautiful, sublime, awful, terrifying freedom that's built into God's creation. In Lois Lowry's remarkable novel, The Giver, a futuristic society has eradicated war and poverty and pain, which might sound pretty ideal to us at first glance. But the way they achieve this is basically by turning everyone into emotionless automatons. Everything is predetermined by the community's elders, and society functions like a well-oiled machine. Babies are genetically engineered, spouses get assigned to each other, and children are given their life roles by the age of 12, and they can never change those roles. Most importantly, memories are extracted and taken away from the community because knowledge about the past could elicit feelings of pain and sadness. Only one person, known as the giver, is selected to bear the collective memories of the community. It's a bleak predicament, isn't it? In this society, all memory and feeling and relational dynamism are eliminated in order to mitigate pain and suffering. To put it plainly, these people forfeit their freedom, their agency for a life devoid of pain and death. To establish such a society is a temptation that even Job feels. After his family and livestock are abruptly killed and he's stricken with serious illness, he demands that creation would move back into non-existence, where all pain and suffering would cease. Let the day perish in which I was born, he says in chapter 3. Let that day be darkness. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds settle upon it. Thick darkness take hold of it, and no joyful cry be heard in it. In order to mitigate pain and suffering, Job wants to uncreate the world, which is exactly what the elders managed to do in The Giver. If you watch the film adaptation, you'll notice that everything in this society is completely gray and colorless. Indeed, the day is like darkness as clouds settle upon it, and no joyful cry can be heard in it. All in the name of eliminating pain and suffering. That's uncreation. But in the final scene of the novel and the film, the giver confronts the head elder with a plea to restore the freedom of their society. You have seen people starve, the elder begins. You've seen people stand on each other's necks just for the view. You know what it feels like when men blow each other up over a simple lie. When people have the freedom to choose, they choose wrong. But the giver is undeterred. We are living a life of shadows, he replies. Echoes of faint, distant whispers of what once made us real. If you'd only see the possibility of love, the loss, the pain, the music, the joy, the raw, impossible, beautiful feeling of love. The message of the giver, as it is in the book of Job, is that our freedom to do evil is the shadow side of our freedom to love. To be a creature is to enter an arena of profound risk, where the prospects for beauty and joy also yield the prospects for pain and suffering. Creation is beautiful and dangerous. But God embraces and even celebrates both the beauty and the dangers of creation. Have you watched the deer in labor? God asks Job. Are you the one who makes the horse so brave and covers its neck with a flowing mane? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? Such beauty demands that we join in a familiar refrain. This is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise. The morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. And yet, God also delights in the dangerous elements of creation. Look at Behemoth, God said to Job. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. These strong, mysterious, wild creatures cannot be tamed, which reminds us that we humans are not the center of creation. We are not the center of the universe. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, God says, or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? We need these creatures. We need the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, to keep us humble. These majestic creatures cannot be tamed, and that's a dangerous thing. But it's also a good thing. God lets them be what they are, ferocious, giant beasts, so that we don't forget what we are, mere mortals and not God. God does delight in the freedom of creation, even if that means that some creatures might transgress their boundaries and become harmful. We're awestruck by the sublime power of the ocean, for example, but the recent tsunami in Indonesia reminds us that its power can turn to devastation when the doors of the sea are breached. Even the Satan is a beautiful creature who's given freedom and boundaries. And that's a risky freedom, isn't it? He's already transgressing his boundaries in our text by refusing to give Job a fair trial. But in our text, the Satan is not exactly a tool God uses to test us as if God is some kind of cosmic sadist. Rather, the Satan is an illustration of how God lets creation be what it has the potential of being and becoming without micromanaging it. And the risk of affording this angel the freedom to love is that the Satan would direct his love elsewhere until he becomes Satan with a capital S. Creation is beautiful and fragile, isn't it? And because of that, bad things can happen. Kate Bowler was living a comfortable life in Durham, North Carolina. She was in her mid-30s, married to the man of her dreams, had a beautiful 3-year-old son, and flourished as a professor of American religion at Duke University. But in the summer of 2015, right out of the blue, Kate was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer that spread to her liver, requiring an experimental immunotherapy treatment every 3 months. Kate recalls a moment shortly after her diagnosis when she was sitting on her patio, reeling from this most unwelcome news. Her parents were inside making soup and passing out surgical masks to stay safe or something, and worrying about Kate's next appointments. In addition to the painful prospects of death and leaving behind her husband and young son, she hated the feeling of being managed all the time. People meant well, of course, but the constant beeping of hospital machines, the scurrying of worried family members, and the platitudes and shallow explanations as to how God could allow this to happen, it just about drove her insane. But as she was sitting there, her friend Ray arrived with a bottle of wine. Ray is a pediatric oncologist and a theologian to boot, who treats children with cancer. So it's rather funny that he, of all people, would present alcohol to the woman with tumors on her liver. But Ray knew how to sit in the ashes with people. After everyone was seated in the living room, he looked at Kate and her parents and he said with the perfect blend of seriousness and gentleness, "This is truly awful. I'm so sorry." His words were jarring to the people in the room. We don't like to hear the truth about pain and suffering, do we? Not to mention death. Or as Kate herself puts it in a memoir that she recently wrote, very few people want to scoot up to the edge with you while the cliff erodes under your feet. But that's exactly what Ray did that evening. Now, as a theologian and a medical professional, Ray was the most credible person to provide answers. But he didn't have any answers. That wasn't the point. As God says in the 3rd verse of today's reading, Job is stricken for no reason at all. We like to think that everything happens for a reason. But God isn't up there pulling strings or micromanaging creation. Sometimes bad things just happen. But the gift that Ray provided for her was this. He gave voice to her experience. This is truly awful. I'm so sorry. These are not highfalutin words about justifying God or finding a silver lining. They're vocal representations of the words that are already in Kate's soul. They're gestures of presence and solidarity with a friend's pain, carving out a space for her entire experience to be honored, dignified, and spoken. And if you read Job carefully, you'll discover that God never responds to the people around Job who just talk about God. God responds to Job because he dares to talk to God. The point is that God is present with those who suffer, carving out a space for them to rage against the cosmic injustices of creation gone awry, even to rage against God himself. That's what it looks like to covenant with God for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. And if God dignifies these painful cries of indignation, shouldn't we also dignify those cries by echoing them back? I'm so sorry. This is awful. If you're here today and you're worried that your pain and your suffering are taboo, we at Wilshire want to carve out a space for you. We want to echo the voice that already resides in your soul. I'm so sorry. This is truly awful. If your body aches from chronic illness, if a sudden tragedy has upended your world and your family cannot quite find its bearings, if cancer has kicked down your door like an unwelcome intruder, if you're crushed beneath the stigma our society foolishly attaches to your mental illness, if your harrowing experience of being sexually assaulted is not heard, we see you, we hear you, we love you, and we believe you. And we're committed here to exorcising the demons that want to keep your struggles hidden beneath the veil of silence. That kind of solidarity looks a little bit like what we just did, doesn't it? It looks a little bit like communion. Perhaps these moments really do call for a bottle of red wine. For even as we share it in grief, it's also a foretaste of a wedding banquet where mourning and crying and pain will be no more, and where every tear will be wiped away from our eyes. Amen.